Welcome to Thursday Dairy Update. I'm Kathy Barrett with the Cornell ProDairy program, and ProDairy, along with it's Dairy Business Communications, is pleased to be able to offer these webinars on Thursdays. So today we have Dr. Rob Lynch, veterinarian and herd management and health specialist for the Cornell ProDairy program. And he's going to be talking to us today about some research that's been done here at Cornell on voluntary wait period, and he's going to share with you some of the findings that they've come up with due to this research.
So for the next 45 minutes, I thought I'd share with you guys some new research that Giordano's lab here at Cornell has done looking at the voluntary wait period. Some of you may have participated in the meetings we held last summer. So if you have, this might be a bit of a repeat for you. So before I did that, I thought maybe I would just kind of high level, maybe we'll talk a little bit about the importance of reproductive programs on dairies. And obviously milk price is the biggest driver for what affects the farm's profitability, but below that we've got reproduction metrics that we know that herds that do better in reproduction tend to do better on a profitability basis. So I thought I'd kind of try to capture where we were right now as a state of reproductive efficiency, and I'll use pregnancy rate or pregnancy risk as our currency of reproductive efficiency. And so best that I could capture out there would be around a 16% U.S. average for dairies. This is a 2011 number. If I look at just DHIA Holstein herds in the U.S., for last year, I get an average of just under 19%. But let's zero in on our cows here in New York State. This also comes from DHIA herds. I'm looking at average annual pregnancy rates from 2010 up to as current as I could get it, so 2016 was a partial number. We could see a nice upward trend in that annual pregnancy rate number. And then most specifically, the most recent 12 months, and maybe the absolute number is not so important, but what really stands out to me is that standard deviation. There are some herds that are really knocking it out of the park in their reproductive programs, and there's some that could really benefit for some improvement. So there's a lot of things we can try to evaluate and try to make improvements in herds' reproductive programs. Economically, I would feel like things are pretty much optimized for herds if they can achieve those pregnancy rates up in the 25 and up closer to 30%. And just from a basic dollar standpoint, we get a marginal value of about $25 per cow per year for each point we can improve that average pregnancy rate. Obviously, anything we spend to help improve that herd's repro program has to come out of that. So we'll always have to analyze how much are we going to spend to make what kind of improvement should we expect. And it's not a linear relationship either. The higher your pregnancy rate is for the herd, the marginal return on making improvements goes down. So we have to be careful as our pregnancy rates climb higher and higher that it makes sense to continue to chase that on the farm. So as an example, even under current milk price conditions, you take a 500 cow dairy that's rolling at what we used to consider a pretty good preg rate. If they could go from a 20% and increase that to 26%, there's roughly about $42,000 per year on the table for that farm. And where does that money come from? I'm sure many of you kind of know where a lot of this is coming from. We've got savings in replacement costs and additional income over feed. We've got more calves to work with, and then actually just more options for the farm. More profitable culling decisions can be made when we've got a full pipeline. So crudely, if we want to boil this down to at a specific farm, here's a diagram look at just increased income for improving pregnancy rates. And this, I believe, Dr. Giordano was at University of Wisconsin, Victor Cabrera helped come up with this. But it's pretty simplistic, but it just shows across the top the current pregnancy rate for a farm, and then down the left side is what the goal for that same farm would be. And so let's take that 20% herd, and their goal was to increase their preg rate up to 26%. And how much money, how many dollars per cow of increased income of a potential is there if they were able to achieve their goal consistently? So even at that, what we would what we used to think was a pretty good preg rate, bringing that up to a higher standard. There's some significant money there on the table for those farms. Now, a lot of these inputs are set on these kind of tables, so flexibility is not there to really dial this in for farm-specific purposes. So there's a few things out there I thought I'd share. Dave Galligan and Jim Ferguson developed some dashboards, and one allowed the user to move around some inputs to really dial in on a specific value for their farm. So you can put in your goal of a preg rate and kind of what the current preg rate is, and adjust your milk price and your feed costs and heifer replacement values and cull values. And you can float some of those numbers around, and it'll move around what that either revenue gain or revenue loss would be, comparing your goal to your current observed preg rates. And this is one also that Dr. Giordano helped develop, and this is an economic modeling tool that really, there's a lot that goes into it, but at the end of the day, you have a really nice analysis of what kind of profit potential is there for switching from a current program to whatever that next program is. So you do have to know your inputs. You got to know how much it's going to cost to make whatever change it is that you're looking to make. And then you can also plug in what are some of your expected outcomes. What are you currently achieving fertility-wise with your current program, and what do you hope to achieve by making changes to whatever this next program is. And right down to the cost of the hormones and the cost of the heat detection technologies, whatever input from an expense-wise standpoint goes, you can plug that into this modeling tool, and it'll help you come up with what kind of profitability is there for making a change, making an improvement. So we try to take apart a breeding program. There's not a whole lot of parts to it. We need to begin by thinking, when do we want to start breeding cows? And then we have a first service strategy, and then that may involve some sort of heat detection program. It may involve a fixed time artificial insemination strategy. We figure out how that first round went, and then we have all subsequent services where we also have that same decision to make. What type of heat detection program are we looking at? And what type of timed AI regimen are we considering for second services and beyond? And then finally, we have to make the decision, when is it no longer profitable, when does it no longer make sense to continue to breed these cows, and they basically end their breeding window. And today we're just going to zero in on that first decision. What do we do with our voluntary wait period? And I guess remember being asked all the time, where should we change our voluntary wait period? Should we be breeding sooner? Should we be breeding later? And I never really had a great answer, because it really depends on very farm-specific outcomes. How well are the current programs working? What kind of improvements do we hope to achieve by moving that voluntary wait period? And in the long run, what does that really do to a farm's profitability? Just because we may be able to increase conception to a first service by moving that voluntary wait period out, in the long run, does that, from a profitability standpoint, does that make the most sense for the farm? That brings us to, well, I guess maybe I'll open it up for folks on the webinar. How about some potential consequences of a decision of maybe we started breeding too soon?
So this is what we have in the chat box, Rob. Lost, decreased lactation milk production, too many calves for the heifer facility.
Yep, some unforeseen downstream effects, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, so it may not work. They may not be in a state where we actually will have any success on getting them pregnant if we start too soon. They're not cycling yet. The uterus isn't cleaned up yet. They're not in a plane of nutrition where they're really suitable for getting pregnant. We could interrupt a lactation curve, and in the end of the day, at the end of their life at the farm, we've actually decreased their what kind of revenue they've been able to generate for that farm, because we've shorted their lactation too soon. Maybe some of the effects of breeding too late. Somewhat of the inverse of that. But we're really going to we'll have an impact on that animal's lifetime profitability by breeding too late. She'll have fewer days and her most efficient phase in her lactation curves throughout her life there at the dairy, and the end of the day, we may be cutting off her ability to generate revenues for the dairy. So we're trying to pick that perfect spot where it makes the most sense to get her pregnant when we're likely to have good results, but not shorten our ability to maximize her profit for the farm. So that brings me to Dr. Giordano's voluntary wait period study, and lead investigator on this was Matthias Sangafero, and they had some assistance from Dairy Health Management Services with the on-farm implementation and execution of the study. And I really tried to evaluate the decision of moving that voluntary wait period and what were the long-term, what were the performance of those cows, and long-term, what were the economics of the decision of moving the voluntary wait period. And I just want to also point out that I was not personally involved in this trial, so I don't know all the ins and outs of what went into how they did it. So some of those specific questions I might not be able to answer, but I have sat down and gone through this with these guys quite a few times, so hopefully I can relay that to you all here successfully this afternoon. Wanted to acknowledge the funding for this trial comes from the New York Farm Viability Institute, and so that is a farmer-run, state-funded organization that provides funds, grant money, to conduct research that's would have particularly high impact on farm profitability and sustainability. So these are nice trials for really having direct impact on success for dairy farms. Also, some funding were provided by Merck Animal Health and Cornell and Accelerated Genetics. So quickly run down basic framework of how the study was put together. These were 3 commercial dairy farms in New York. These are Holstein farms. And animals were enrolled over about a year period from March 14 to March 15. These were either 3X or 2X farms, and all farms were on an RBST regimen of some sort. Cows were weekly enrollments and blocked by parity first lactation animals versus older cows. And there was a subset of these animals that were randomized for a trace mineral study, which I don't know the results of. I didn't look like it showed any benefits, and I don't know the ins and outs of that one, so I'm going to skip that as well. So here's the layout of how animals were enrolled in either what's considered the short voluntary wait period or the long voluntary wait period. And so we had about 1,200 animals enrolled in the short voluntary wait period group, and about equal to that in the long voluntary wait period. And both groups received a systemized timed AI first service by way of a double OPSYNC program. And the only difference between these two groups is when the double OPSYNC was run. So the short voluntary wait period cows, they received their first service, their first insemination. The voluntary wait period ended for them at 60 days in milk, plus or minus 3. Compared to the long voluntary wait period cows, they were started later and therefore bred a little bit later. They were all bred for the first time around 88 days, plus or minus 3. Afterwards, they both basically followed the same re-service regimens. They were estrus detected, and if they were seen in the heat, they were bred, and if they were open at pregnancy diagnosis, they went ahead and enrolled in a 32-day resync strategy. So second service and on were all the same. And we followed these cows out for what they call the experimental lactation. It's over a 350-day period. So that gives us about a 28-day gap or a head start that the short voluntary wait period cows had versus the long voluntary wait period cows. And you start to think about what kind of outcomes would you expect to see by that almost a month delay in first service. So some of the things we probably were thinking about when we started here would, well, if we start too soon, do we have cyclicity issues? So they evaluated this, and so part of the trial was looking at progesterone profiles on these cows in the 2 different wait period groups. So if cyclicity is an issue, you would expect that cyclicity would improve as these cows moved on beyond, got further out from their time of calving. So we have a table on the top and a little schematic on the bottom that just sort of will walk through what these progesterone levels came in at for each group. So these are split out by primiparous animals and all those older cows, the second lactation and on. And the SVWP and LVWP, you'll see a lot of that in this presentation. That's just short voluntary wait period, long voluntary wait period. So we'll start with a baseline, and we wouldn't expect these numbers to be any different. The animals were considered to have a functional CL if their serum progesterone levels were greater than 1 nanograms per mil. And so at 33 days in milk, both groups had serum progesterones checked, and these were a subset of cows within the overall framework of the study, and they were not different. So now we compare GnRH1. So the short voluntary wait period cows, their GnRH1 is the same as baseline, but the long voluntary wait period cows, their GnRH1 was another 60 days later. So you can see that we see a real difference here in percentage of cows that were considered to have a functional CL. Cows that were given a little extra time showed a higher percentage were actually cycling at that GnRH1, that pre-op GnRH injection. To go out a little bit further and compare them to the breeding GnRH, now that effect has gone away. And we can probably assume that some of that is the effect of the GnRH that was given at the first injection. So there's somewhat of a correction going on here because we've intervened in the cow's estrous cycle by introducing the GnRH injection. So they have lost some of that cyclicity benefit just by giving the medication. But we were able to show that, Julio's lab, they were able to demonstrate that, yes, there was a cyclicity improvement as we waited to breed cows. Down in the uterus, we'd also expect an improvement. The more time we give cows to kind of clean up whatever type of infection may still be lingering after calving, we give her a little extra time. We would hope that uterus was more suitable to maintain a pregnancy when it comes down to breeding time. In order to evaluate that, a couple of things were checked. Using a MetroCheck, which is basically just a scoop that will collect fluid in the vaginal vault of cows and evaluate that for its character. And then actually by cytology, by cytologic exam, we can see what kind of cells are we seeing in that discharge. So using a 5-point or a 6-point scale system on the MetroCheck results and just lumping them into 2 categories, where if the mucus that they collected via the MetroCheck was clear or there was no discharge, that was purulent vaginal discharge negative. It was negative for pussy discharge. And any type of flex or pus or where it was in that, if they found any sort of abnormal discharge, that was all categorized as a positive purulent vaginal discharge score. So again, in that same framework, that same timeline, we see baseline levels not different within parity, not significantly different anyway. We get out to GnRH1 because those animals in the longer voluntary wait period had more time to clean up. They were quite a bit better off on their MetroCheck scores compared to the animals who were scored earlier on in their lactation back at 33 days in milk. And that effect was carried on out to the time of first, or the GnRH given at breeding. So cows given more time to heal up in their uterus, we were able to demonstrate that with the MetroCheck results. The cytology results kind of tell a similar story. Baseline values, short voluntary wait period in green and long voluntary wait period in yellow, were not significantly different. But we look at cytology scores improving significantly for those cows when given extra time. The long voluntary wait period scores, both at GnRH1 and the GnRH given at breeding, were significantly better than the short voluntary wait period cows. So we'd expect to see better fertility for cows given that long voluntary wait period before we begin breeding. That would be a pretty fair assumption. And then finally, just looking at negative energy balance and following that out, just looking at body condition score, recovery, and energy balance status and how these cows are looking at the time of breeding, we would expect cows to come out of their negative energy balance and then start being more fertile and more responsive to breeding once they're through that early negative energy balance window. And so given more time, cows are in a better plane of nutrition and just in a better state to respond positively to breeding programs compared to animals bred earlier. So we're able to evaluate that looking at body condition scores. So over that same time frame, the two different voluntary wait period groups that compared what percentage of the cows had a body condition score of 2 3/4 or higher, and break that out by parity as well. So obviously no difference in body score at 33 days in milk when you compare the two groups. And then when we follow them out, give those cows an extra 30 days, their body condition scores were significantly improved compared to cows that were on the short voluntary wait period group, 30 days sooner. Also a difference in body condition distribution of first lactation animals compared to the older cows as well. And this difference was seen further on out at the time of breeding. Better body condition scores for the long wait period cows compared to short wait period cows. So success to first AI. So if we look at pregnancy per AI, short voluntary wait period in green, long voluntary wait period in yellow, we can see there was a significant improvement in outcomes on the animals that were given the extra time, that extra 28 days voluntary wait period for first service success. About five points better. There was quite a bit of an effect here by parity. So if you look at first lactation animals versus everybody else, much better pregnancy per AI in those younger animals compared to the older cows, and we probably would expect that as well. So going forward, we'll look at these results. We're going to split these groups out and look at primiparous animals versus multiparous animals going forward. So for the primiparous animals, about almost a 9-point improvement in pregnancy per AI for the animals that were given that longer voluntary wait period window. Not a whole lot of difference in the multiparous cows, just a few points improvement, not significant for those cows that were given the extra 28 days. So if we look from a survival curve standpoint, just kind of explain quickly what these curves look like. At 0 days in milk, nobody's pregnant. So 100% of the animals are open, and then as soon as you reach your voluntary wait period, animals start getting pregnant, and these curves start dropping. So you can see the rate at which the short voluntary wait period cows in blue versus the long voluntary wait period cows in green, the rate at which they get pregnant. So the table here on the right shows median and mean days to pregnancy for the short voluntary wait period versus the long. And so at the end of the day, the short voluntary wait period cows pretty much caught up. But if you can see initially, we get a nice steep drop of those cows on the short voluntary wait period window. The long voluntary wait period cows can't get pregnant then because we were waiting. We deliberately delayed the time in which they were going to get their first insemination. So multiparous cows, somewhat similar. We can see survival curves for both short voluntary wait period and long voluntary wait period. Median and mean days to pregnancy significantly shorter for the shorter voluntary wait period groups. So that's what we're shooting for. Percent pregnant by 350 days, actually not quite to 0.05, but those short voluntary wait period cows, in the long run, we're getting pretty close to better off starting on that shorter voluntary wait period window. So if we look at profitability, try to plug in all the things that these different breeding programs will do to a farm's profitability, splitting them out by parity again, over that experimental lactation, and just a reminder, that meant 350 days, the profitability compared to short voluntary wait period group versus long, what would you expect to see? if you think over 350 days, how many of those days were cows actually contributing milk to the tank? So long voluntary wait period cows, they just had more days to contribute milk into that tank during that 350-day window. So shouldn't be too surprised that from a profitability standpoint, they were more profitable, but just because they milked for longer within the experimental window. There was a slight numerical improvement on the multiparous cows, but basically these numbers are actually essentially the same. But if we expand that out to 18 months, so now these cows have had a chance to not only complete that first 350-day experimental lactation, they've gone through a dry period and now have come into their next lactation. And so now we see the numbers somewhat flipped here. We've not statistically different, but numerically improved even in the permiparous animals, that short voluntary wait period group. They had an ability to complete that first lactation, complete a dry period, and then jump into the next lactation where they're in that higher phase in their lactation curve and being more efficient, more profitable for the farm. And multiparous cows, not significant, but a trend of also improved profitability looking at this over that 18-month window. So kind of diagrammatically looking at what's going on here, that yellow dotted line, that's the long lactation group versus the green solid line, short voluntary wait period group. Over that 350-day window, the long group, they just were out there milking for that many more days. And so at the end of 350 days, they contributed more profit or income over feed to the farm. But the short voluntary wait period cows came back into the next lactation quicker and got up into that higher end of their lactation curve, and in the long run probably turned out to be more profitable because they were just in a higher stage of their lactation curve for more. We model this out over multiple lactations, so this is just extrapolating from the previous data, but you can see in the blue line, that's the short voluntary wait period cows versus the long in orange. You can see that those short voluntary wait period group, they're getting into the next lactation quicker, and they have an opportunity to spend more time through their lifetime on the farm. And we'll call this at a 4-year window in a better stage of their lactation curve compared to the long voluntary wait period cows. So the assumption was, well, if we're always going to get better fertility by delaying first service, maybe we should just push our voluntary wait periods out. And I think we need to think a little more closely about that and think longer term, think about lifetime profitability, not just conception to first AI when we're trying to evaluate when should we be setting our voluntary wait period. So conclusions of that trial were that they did see that extending the duration of the voluntary wait period by the 28 days did increase pregnancies per AI at first service. And that the greatest effect was observed in the first lactation animals. Additional opportunities, however, for breeding those cows in the short voluntary wait period group compensated down the road for that lower first service time to AI success. So kind of a wash there. So during the experimental lactation, the first lactation animals in the long voluntary wait period group had longer lactations, greater income over feed and profitability, but had a similar profitability on a per day basis. And then over the 18-month period after calving, there were no differences observed between the two wait period groups. So it really comes down to where the decision to make the change on that voluntary wait period really comes down to what kind of success are we having in our current program, what sort of improvements should we expect to see or would we need to see in order to make that move make sense. And really that's gonna vary from one farm to the next. And I think that's what's so nice with the modeling tool that Dr. Giordano put together. It kind of helps plug in some of those farm-specific inputs to see what makes the most sense for my farm, or if nothing else, what kind of benefit would I need, what sort of improvement would I have to see for this decision to change our program to even break even. So Another similar approach they took, Dr. Giordano's lab, was to also evaluate, this is now a three-way comparison of a timed AI program versus timed AI with estrus detection on first service, because the prior trial was a straight double off sync both groups. So now we've got a timed AI with estrus detection on first service, a pre-sync off-sync program, compared that to, we'll call it a short voluntary wait period, but it's a double off-sync short voluntary wait period that starts at 60 days versus 50 for the pre-sync off-sync group, versus that delay again out to 88 days in milk. We'll call that the long voluntary wait period group. It started with a double off-sync. And then after first service, they all were subject to the same second service programs. And I just wanted to, again, maybe I already said it once before, but these are, and the financials are still coming in on some more of these cows. So these numbers are likely to change a little bit, probably not dramatically, but the results here are not final. So a diagram of the pre-sync off-sync group, and their first service begins at 50 days plus or minus 3 days. But if they're seen after 50 days, regardless of where they are in their pre-sync off-sync regimen, they'll get inseminated if seen in estrus. And then anybody not seen in estrus will reach their time AI window at 75 days in milk. And then subsequent to that, estrus detection and resync at open diagnosis out, and follow them out 350 days. Then we have the short and the long voluntary wait period cows, and those cows laid out very similar to what I described earlier. But in a nutshell, short voluntary wait period, we could call the pre-sync off-sync shorter or shortest wait period, but short voluntary wait period cows are at 60, and long voluntary wait period cows don't get their first insemination until 88. Results are pretty interesting here. The first thing is the pregnancy per AI at first service. No real difference across the different voluntary wait period groups. Numerically, the pre-sync off-sync group showed the lowest pregnancy per AI. There was a parity effect at this site that was ran the Reaper program this way. So the first lactation animals did significantly better than the older cows on the first service pregnancy per AI. Pregnancy per AI split out by parity now. Again, no real difference between these three programs from a fertility standpoint. Numerically, the long voluntary wait period cows did better, but not significantly better. The older cows, similar. They all sort of achieved similar results on first service from a fertility standpoint. So here are those survival curves. We see the short voluntary wait period in blue, long voluntary wait period in green, and pre-sync off-sync or shortest voluntary wait period in orange. And so as we'd expect, we gave those long cows more time before we started even trying to get them pregnant. So their survival curves are stretched out a little bit. Mean and median days to pregnancy, the pre-sync off-sync group and the short voluntary wait period group, quite a bit shorter on mean and median days to pregnancy compared to the long voluntary wait period cows. The only real difference between these groups were the hazard ratios were showing that the short voluntary wait period cows actually did significantly better than the long voluntary wait period cows. This is in the first lactation animals. Here's how it looked for the older cows. Again, we see significantly shorter median and mean days to pregnancy for the animals that were on the two shorter voluntary wait period groups. And again, the hazard ratio for the short voluntary wait period versus long voluntary wait period cows showed significant improvement in pregnancy for the short voluntary wait period cows. So if we look at the financials, the economic analysis for the first lactation animals, the profitability for the short voluntary wait period group numerically improved over the long voluntary wait period cows, but not by much. And compared to the pre-sync off-sync shorter voluntary wait period window, not real different either. So not a whole lot of difference over an 18-month period on these groups based on profitability. And if we look at the multiparous cows over an 18-month span, we see a similar effect. Maybe we can argue that that voluntary wait period group cows, now that's getting close to where financially it makes more sense to really look at those older cows and focus on a shorter wait period versus long. But compared to the short double ovulation group compared to the pre-sync ovulation group, really no difference from a profitability standpoint. And again, these numbers aren't all in yet. The financials are being, the final cows' financials are being plugged in, and we don't expect to see a dramatic change in these values, but they will shift a little. So that is what I prepared for this afternoon's webinar. I think we're okay on time, Kathy, if we wanted to open up, try to answer any questions.
Sure. So we did have a comment in the chat box. Folks, if you have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box. So the one comment was, great demo that looking at profit too early gives the wrong impression, and long voluntary wait period is bad for farms. So there was one comment talking about the demo where that came up when you were showing how you took it out past a year, 18 months, et cetera, and looked at profitability there. So
yeah, we tend to look at this with blinders, and we're so focused on first service success, and we see that, oh, look, I can get higher conception if I just do this other thing, and I push my wait period out longer. And we sometimes, I think we forget to take a step back and look overall from a profit standpoint. Is that the smartest strategy to take?
Mm-hmm. So, Rob, in the beginning of the presentation, you said farmers are always asking you, what should their voluntary wait period be, et cetera. So after looking at this research, do you have a clearer recommendation you would make for folks?
Yeah, I doubt we'll ever see a time where we just say, hey, everybody, this ought to be your voluntary wait period. This is a number that's going to work for everybody. It's just too much variation around the industry. And so I don't think we'll have a number like that, but I do think we know enough. We know what to look for. We know what to plug in. We know what to expect. So when we break our programs down, we kind of look at them piece by piece. We know that if we do think we want to move that wait period, here's what we need to pick up in success in order to really justify that change. And again, it may make sense on some farms to hold off, and on others, it certainly doesn't.
Right. Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat box, so I guess we'll wind up here. Oh, wait a minute. We do have a question. For profit, do you look at income over feed cost? If so, use individual milk? That's the question. And individual feed consumption.
I don't think they've got individual feed consumption in there because I'm just not aware of places that we can get that on a large scale commercial dairy. So that's got to be pen level intakes. The profitability is trying to account for more than just the income over feed. But if I change my breeding program, that may increase my number of inseminations. It may change my hormone regimens, and so the profitability tries to take into we've got additional culling revenue to consider, and so there's a lot more that goes into that than just the income over feed. But that is the number one driver, so it will heavily influence the overall profitability.
Okay, so there, I think we'll wind up there. Thanks very much, Rob, for an excellent presentation. Thanks, folks, for joining us.